So Markus, thank you so much for joining me today. We are sitting here in our more or less hometown, Vienna, because you're from Upper Austria and I'm from Carinthia. Let's start with some warm-up questions. If you are dead, what is the last sentence on your gravestone?
He tried it.
Hopefully he made it as well.
He really tried it.
So you're on a long journey. What is your mission and what are your goals in your professional life?
As being a professor for medical genetics, there is one major aim in my life, that is at least playing in this game, trying to find new therapies for genetic diseases for patients.
I see. So if you are in a situation to start your life again, what is your plan B, if not genetics?
I never thought in my life about a plan B. I didn't when I studied, and I'm almost now 30 years in this topic, and I don't feel that there was really a second in this 30 years where I thought about a plan B. The only thing is that there are some other things that really, that I really like. So if it would not be possible to do genetics, I probably would be a writer.
Wow.
Or something like that.
Perfect. So you found your way and it's your passion.
Yep.
Perfect. So let's come back to some other questions just to warm you up a little bit. It's about if you would be an animal, what kind of animal would you be?
See, I have a cat and a dog at home in my house, living with my wife and the cat and the dog.
I think you're more a wild person, not this.
So, and if I would have to decide between the cat and the dog, I would take the dog.
Yeah, why the dog?
Our dog is quite a large dog with a, let's say, kind of very active character, and I would prefer that. The cat is sleeping a little bit too much.
Okay.
That doesn't really fit to my personality.
I see, perfect. So if you would be, let's say, a river, what kind of a river would you be?
I would be the Donau anyhow.
The Donau anyhow?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Between my hometown, my original hometown Linz and Vienna, there's the Donau, so this is the connection that connects these two cities for me, so why not?
So for all the people out there watching this video, if you see a person swimming from Austria to Vienna, it's Markus.
That's me. No.
The blue Danube. So if you could choose a person on the planet you want to meet once in your lifetime, is there a person you would want to meet? Where you guess, this person, I saw them on television, I heard about the person. What is this person?
It makes a difference if we talk about persons who are still around or in the
past. Perhaps that person. So.
Yeah. So then I would really love to meet Sigmund Freud.
Why?
I think just by your thoughts changing the way of thinking on planet Earth. I mean, there were several persons who were able to do that. Sigmund Freud was one of those, and I'm absolutely not in this field. But it really interests me a lot, and that would be, for me, a fascinating discussion, I think, just asking him some questions.
No, it's amazing because it's quite near to Berggasse.
Yep.
So it's just a walk of some minutes to meet him again.
Yeah.
And so if you talk about Sigmund Freud and his thoughts, what is the impact of Sigmund Freud today?
I give you my very personal feeling about a discussion we had for many, many years, and it is this kind of separation between, let's say, psychological aspects and physical aspects. And as we now know, that epigenetic drives the way how you use your genes, and this is affected by the environment in very, very different ways. I think that this, what Sigmund Freud thought, and many others, and especially that, what I at least know about that, might have more basis when we discuss it between, psychology and genetics or epigenetics. I would really love to have some thoughts about that, what he would think about that.
I just imagine Sigmund Freud sitting there in his more or less place in the Berggasse. You will be laying on the couch, de-stressed at all, and just reflecting and talking about your thoughts. So it's quite impressive, because the next question exactly leads to this. So please describe your professional background. What are you really doing now?
There are three things I'm really doing. The one is teaching students, since almost now 25 years. Students involved in genetics, biochemistry, biology, medicine. Secondly, we do genetic diagnosis for patients, counseling and genetic diagnosis for patients. Whenever genes might be associated to the disease in this family, this is our topic. And the third major part, of course, is research, always connected to the question what can we contribute to questions like therapies for genetic diseases, stem cell biology, and comparable things.
I see. So if you talk about genetics, it's a topic, if you reflect it in the media nowadays, what kind of reflection do you get? Is it the true genetics? Is it just the fear of genetics? What is it about?
See, there are different topics within or under the umbrella of genetics. There's plant genetics, and I'm representing the topic of medical or human genetics. And human genetics is a discussion that is on very, very many different ways, a very ethical, let's say, discussion, or polarized discussion. There are things we should do, there are things we should not do. And as being one of the members of the Ethics Commission of the Austrian Ethics Commission, where we counsel politicians regarding the decision, and laws in the future, it's an ongoing discussion, because there are so many new things coming every single day in our field, so that we really have to update this discussion almost every half a year. Very recently, in November, December 2018, Chinese colleagues at least claimed there is no publication available, so we cannot really prove that it's true, but they claimed that the first time on planet Earth, they have modified the genome of a human being that has been born, 2 human beings in this case. So what didn't happen during evolution, since, we exist and before. So that changes everything. When we think about that now, we can at least partly play evolution by affecting the genome of human beings for the future. And this must be discussed. It's just one aspect. So you see that I absolutely understand that people say we have to, in parallel, always have a very precise and very detailed ethical discussion about what geneticists do and what they should not do. And so there is, I think, something we need to do. We need to talk with media, and we need to explain what we are able to do, so that people out there can, develop their own opinion and then find conclusions on that.
That's perfect, because normally if you talk about this, I would guess, hot topic, there's a spread between the scientific community and the public community as well. And sometimes there's a lot of misunderstanding and misleading interpretations, so I ask for this.
Absolutely.
All right. So what are you searching for the next years? Do you have some special projects in your mind?
Yeah, at the moment, one of the major projects is ongoing in our institute is the question what is needed at the very beginning of when life starts, that life starts correctly. So what we do is we somehow mimic the start of a human being in a petri dish. We call it an embryoid or an organoid. So what we can do in this petri dish is to generate a three-dimensional structure that at least mimics an embryo. It's not an embryo, it could never develop to a human being, but using this kind of embryoid, not an embryo, but something that looks like and has morphology and functional similarities to embryos, we use these models to find out what is wrong when it doesn't really run correctly. So we modify genes in this model to find out what we could do best to understand that.
That's very interesting. So you're sometimes a public speaker as well. What is the reason for you as a scientist and a professor to do this?
I mean, there are several different reasons, but one is that, as we already discussed, that the field of genetics is very polarized, discussed in the public, and we want to take care that at least that what we know should be the level people discuss on. So of course we don't know everything, and we are still surprised sometimes what we see in the Petri dish, right? and then we have to explain, right? So that this kind of process gets or is started, that people can discuss it and finally drive this discussion into the generation of new laws, that they say, okay, these are things we want to have and these are things we don't want to have. So whenever somebody's inviting me to, I don't know, podium discussions or keynotes or whatever, it's one of my major aims to explain what we do. Secondly, I think that there's always a need to make clear that science needs money. And it's not only, that we need money for sports or similar things, we also need a lot of money for science. And I think, we cannot often enough clarify that this is something not only because politicians, take their decision based on that, what they believe the community wants to have, or people out there wants to have. So when we convince people that science is very important, so then politicians will take the right decisions, also regarding money.
I think politicians thinking about the future should do so.
Okay.
So now if you talk about the European Union and the European scene in the scientific field, do you think that your topic is funded well, or?
As being a scientist since many years, it can never be enough. This is my first answer. But it's always an absolute or a relative answer. So when we, it can never be enough, but also means that when we compare it to other fields, we are not that, it's quite highly supported what we do comparing to other fields, but still we feel it could be more.
Yeah, for sure. So I was honored and pleased that you accepted my invitation to Saint-Tropez last year. It was the Fast Forward Forum, and we produced together a very nice book, I would guess, Fast Forward Files. So what is your honest opinion about the people, the format and results of this Fast Forward Forum?
I think it's, as being part of many conferences, international conferences over the year, most of them are scientific conferences when it, in the field of genetics, but several others also when it, dealing with innovation and R&D in general and talent management and all these kind of things. I think the problem mostly is that there is a lot of presentations, people take all their notes and go home, and then there is no action out of that. Neither the action between, the people on the conference, but also not as a future, let's say, line after the conference that you start thinking and dealing with these things. And that's what I experienced at the Fast Forward Forum were two things. First of all, the discussion there was really on a very high level and very interactive. It was more discussion than talks. So this is new, because normally it's always talks and almost no discussion. And at the Fast Forward Forum, I experienced, a much higher level of discussion compared to the talks. There were talks, of course. And secondly, I feel that there is something going on now, and there's something that you were able to initiate something that makes a lot of difference, because normally you come home to the conference and after 2 weeks you don't really remember. And then you take out your notes every month and find out, this was this talk and this was this guy. But here there's something going on, and these two things, more discussion and something that has been initiated, is different.
So if you would be my advisor for the next conference in Venice in October this year, what is your advice for the next?
I thought the only thing I had to deal with at the last Fast Forward Forum was that the topics were to some extent really different. And so the only thing I would suggest is to focus a little bit more on one major thing from very many different directions like design thinking, not by saying different people talk about different things, but rather different people talk about similar things, so that we have different opinions to one major topic. And then, you know, design thinking is always you ask people coming together, normally not from the same field, discussing one thing, and then they discuss this one thing, and you see that you come to new conclusions by the fact that they have different ideas on that. In the end, because then we could, you know, as a starting point, we could then initiate the discussion on this one topic and run for this one topic, and even, you know, go into action for this one topic, whatever it is. But I think that would be, I mean, this would be my suggestion, a little bit more focus on a topic.
That's a very good advice. So what do you think about the format, because it's 3 days? The idea is more or less to build the group. The second is no technical support in the sense of computer or PowerPoint or whatever. And the third is, and this is my kind of creating a new situation of talks, it's no stage. Normally you have a stage, and so you're sitting in the middle of the people, like in the group in a classroom or with friends together, and to talk. Do you think that this is, let's say, a way to bring people together and to have this more or less same level approach?
Absolutely, yes, I do think that this is a very good approach. You know, the first thing you have to do when you start the conference, you have to make it clear that there are 2 or 3 things that are really important to that. The first is there's no boundaries. It is not like there is somebody out there and I'm here in the auditorium and this guy over there is there and here's me, right? But rather saying we are all on one level and now we start, right? Whether you're one asked to give a short speech or whether you're not asked to give the contribution is the same, right? So this is the first thing. The second thing is these 3 days. I mean, you know, most it is like that for example, for me, you know, as having, let's say, going to many different conferences, I normally start in the morning by flying away from Vienna, and then I listen to 3-4 talks wherever I am, whether in London or Berlin or whatever, and then I give my talk, and with the last flight on the same day I go home to Vienna, right? So what does not happen is to bring the discussion, you know, into different, let's say, situations. And so when you have then a situation where you drink a coffee, but then have a situation where you have your lunch or your dinner, and then you sit with somebody who was not giving a speech, who was probably listening to, and you sit in front of this person is just, you know, talking, and you have to answer. Those are totally other questions as people would ask when there is a stage. Somebody's standing out there and you have to raise your hand and everybody's listening, and then you say, I have this one, and then you know the chair would say, yes, but a short question please, we have a lot of time. And so, but in these situations, as I experienced it at the Fast Forward Forum, you know, people have time. And time makes a huge difference with regard to discussions.
Yeah, that's exactly the point, because normally if you go to a very big conference, the people ask for the icebreaker question, you know, and it's kind of, let's say, they are playing like having a discussion, and in my thoughts, I felt that bringing people together on a table or sit around in a cafe just to talk.
Yeah.
Exactly, there are no boundaries, you're free of thoughts, you can think what you want, you can talk what you want, and it's kind of a privacy situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Environment makes difference regarding your thoughts. Exactly. So that means when you're sitting, you're having a coffee in your hand and just you are relaxed, your brain probably thinks about other things, and so other questions are coming up. Compared to that you're sitting, you know, in an auditorium and there's somebody on a stage. So I see, I think it makes a huge difference under what kind of situations people discuss.
Exactly. So if you're sitting together with a friend in a cafe in Vienna, you're used to it, I would say, how would you invite him to the next Fast Forward Forum to Venice, for instance?
Yeah, first of all, as I said, topic. Yeah. There's a topic, I would just, you know, go for this topic and say this is, because the decision, what kind of topic, it must be a relevant one, right? So when it's a relevant one, I have already my door open. When I say, I mean, did you never think about this topic? And this person would say, yes, I thought. There's the best way to think about this topic is to go to the Fast Forward forum and contribute your thoughts or even give a talk or whatever. So, of course, you know, the door opener is the topic. But secondly, this person would ask me then, okay, you know, this topic, and a lot of people have already talked about this topic, right? Because we cannot raise a topic that is so irrelevant that nobody wants to talk about it. Sure. So we have to take one that is relevant. So, and then this person, what is the difference of that? And then I would come up with all that what we've discussed now, that I say that makes a difference when you go to the Fast Forward forum. The contribution you can make, the output you get is different to that what you experienced in the past in other conferences.
That's nice. And now we close our short interview. Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure, as always. Thank you for advice for the conference as well. I will pick whatever I get, you know. And it came into my thoughts because we were talking some days ago in a cafe nearby about your background, about your family, about where you're coming from, and so on, about your studies as well. And so genetics is more or less your passion, your life. But people going into a certain direction, let's say if you're a student, we have a lot of students here at the university, what do you ask them if they apply for genetics?
Of course, there are two different questions we have to discuss with the students. One is why genetics? What is the reason why not, you know, any other kind of study you would take or decide for? And there is a lot of questions we could discuss if people have really the right picture of that. But you know, at the very end, is that what you can do with genetics? Because sometimes people start with ideas that are not realistic to that. What is the job of a geneticist at the very end? So this is a discussion we normally do. But then it makes a huge difference if you study genetics for, I don't know, you want to work in a pharma industry and you want to sell a product or whatever, or you want to do basic research, right? And basic research is something where we really say, this is something where you don't earn a lot of money. This is something where your intrinsic motivation is really the driving force for the rest of your life. Think about that, whether your intrinsic motivation is high enough that you can really think about 30, 40, 50 years working, sometimes having good results, something having no results at all, and you're still motivated, right? Because you want to know. So and I always make clear that understanding how life and biology works is the real intrinsic drive that these people decide for genetics, and not any other, like I want to earn money, I want to become famous, whatever. Because this is not very likely. It is very likely that you work with biological problems and that at least once, 2 or 3 times in your life you have this, let's say, possibility to change the way of thinking, this really game changer events where you really experience that you now did something nobody ever did before, and that you now contributed to this topic in a way, you know, that really make differences. But this is probably 2 or 3 times in the life of a scientist, and that means that you have many years in front of you when you sit as a student in my office, where you don't see this direct interaction between your work and the result. So this is really important, because we lose a lot of young people after years finding out I cannot really motivate myself that hard.
Thank you so much for the time again.
Thank you.
And I know exactly that you are one of our game changers in Austria. Thank you so much for being here in our, let's say, country. We need, let's say, people like you. Thank you so much.